in the last week, so it's all relative, I guess. Because that's more introductory information, I want to pause there and take any questions or comments that you would have before moving on to the scenarios and options. And I want to make abundantly clear, again, the purpose of the discussion tonight, both at the Finance Committee and the school board meeting, is not to approve the budget options. This is January, the budget doesn't need to be approved in total until June. But we do need to start getting some legwork done and moving towards an enrollment target for next year. The reason why you see the related budget options is it gives sort of an illustration to the enrollment target. So that's really the main reason, if that makes sense. Any other questions on the first 9 pages before we move on to the scenarios and options?
Just, I think I've asked this before. Why historically has the West Metro seemed to levy, well, not seem to, does, why are they levying so much more than these metro districts?
Great question. So Kevin's referencing is at page 4 in particular, the district levy per student, and you'll see that right away St. Louis Park and Hopkins are in the $2,000 range, which is actually above the state authorized cap, which for this year is $1,967. The amount that Arno has an approved levy. Hopkins and St. Louis Park follow under an alternative cap calculation. I won't go through how they calculate that out, but to answer your question, there are really 2 main factors, and this bleeds into the levy discussion a little bit. There's a dollar amount and then a tax impact. And so, although Mtg has the lowest levy per student of the comparable districts here, except for Forest Lake, our tax impact is not the second lowest.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at the size, when we were doing the benchmarking, we were looking at property values and taxes and all that stuff. The one thing we didn't really think about was size of school relative to number of households, or just that. And I think, in my own mind, I said we must be undersized relative to maybe an Orono or something like that. So they can levy more per student, but on a household basis, you divide by a larger base. It turns out to be a lower number, right, in terms of the tax impact. So it's actually more affordable on an individual person basis, while we're very, thoughtful about expenditures per student and that type of stuff. So that would be my guess. It would be interesting to see what those statistics are, kind of size of school to size of overall base. Is that kind of what's behind it?
Yeah.
Well, it's just how the numbers work, right? It's numerator and denominator.
And it's lack of commercial property, too, is
That would be the other
really the
variable.
main driver. Yep, if you look at St. Louis Park, Hopkins, even Stillwater to some extent, their dollar amount at $1,515 per student actually generates a lower tax impact on the same value home as you do in Mtg, even though we're
because you're also going against commercial property.
Exactly. Yep, we're heavily residential.
I mean, the thing that strikes me though is this: why is this a West Metro deal and not an East Metro deal? I mean, yeah, I could see individual examples, but I mean, it just seems like the West Metro has always just been higher.
And it seems like when you're talking to East Metro districts, they're talking about their levy relative to the cap. I've met with a couple of West Metro districts that are talking about lobbying the legislature to increase the cap because they're already at or above. So with just that structural deficit that exists between increases that we're seeing from the state and increases in educational expenditures, more of that burden is shifting to the taxpayer across the state. And for that reason, they're starting to look at cap.
Bill, can I add about equalization?
Yes.
Last year, you may recall that there was some push of the legislature for equalization so that a district like Mtg would be equalized.
A bit similar to the fiscal disparities.
Yeah, exactly. And Senator Weeder worked hard with it, but they were in the minority and it did not get out of committee. They'll take another run at it this year and hopefully we'll be able to get it in. Because it does make a big difference if the equalization amount
Any other questions?
And we were warned by another legislator at our advocacy tour this fall that equalization could hurt us. And she told us to be very careful
Yeah.
for what we wish for.
Our commercial property value, we have FedEx and the Littleton Post Office.
She was talking more statewide.
Oh,
I mean, and that was her perspective. She said, be careful what you wish for. And so I'm just relaying.
I just had one question going back to, we had this discussion a year ago about the district enrollment, how we missed in 2016, 2017. I'm looking at this chart.
yes.
So it's only, the increase is only, by 10 students per bar measurement. But the big drop we had from 2015, 16 to 2016, 17 on that miss. I guess I'm curious why we haven't, why we're not projecting any type of recovery based on that. Where we have, why we're not projecting any additional open enrollment or branding of Mtg to increase that.
What I can tell you is in the enrollment scenarios that we're going to look at, there'll be discussion about this. In conversations with staff, they've said, how have we gone from 15, 16, where we had a balanced general fund budget, to this fairly significant deficit forecast in 18, 19, essentially 3 years. What you see on page 6 has a large part to do with it.
Do you also want to speak a little bit on page 5, just the disparities between the outstate and then 720 Metro and Mtg, which I think also contributes to that.
But before we go there, I think we need to be clear that we've missed targets a number of years.
Right.
This isn't a first time thing, it's the first time we've missed by this much under, but we were going way over because you can't predict these numbers, and so we were way higher than we were comfortable with. And so our ultimate goal, the board directed the district to start moving that down. It moved down too sharply too soon because of, factors outside our control. But in fact, yes, we missed it, but we missed it a lot. We don't get to, say, oh, we accepted you, so you're automatically coming. We usually miss our target. We've never actually hit our target. Have we?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But we've almost always been, except for the last couple of years, missing high.
Which has caused the district to grow and be larger, which causes other impacts to curriculum and learning for students. So it's this balancing act between experience and, finances.
Thanks.
And as Dr. Larson mentioned, one other thing, I'll mention is on page 5, and I think it's remarkable that the U.S. News and World Report has Mtg High School District ranked the number 3 district, or number 3 high school in the state, given that on average, Mtg receives and spends over $1,200 less than the average 7-county metro district. That's in large part due to our relatively low free and reduced lunch counts and related categorical revenue, things like basic skills, title revenue, things of that nature. Districts with a higher need are going to receive some higher categorical revenue, as they should. But certainly our levy plays a part in that. At that 1,044 per adjusted pupil unit, we're just generating less levy revenue than a lot of our comparable districts. So I think this is remarkable, but certainly budget reductions or budget processes are complicated when you're just generating less revenue per student. So it doesn't make going through this process easier because you're already operating pretty efficiently.
I want to point out one other thing on that. If you look at the difference between statewide revenue and expenditures for the statewide, you'll see that it's a difference of about $900. 720 metropolitan area, it's a difference of about $1,100. For us, it's $18. And so we're taking the money and we're putting it into the classroom. We're not banking it. We're not doing any fund balance type things. This is going to our good classroom. So we're really keeping it pretty tight. And also, this was 2016. We don't have 2017 statewide or 720 metro.
Yep, this is right off our report. If there are no other questions, I want to make sure that, for the sake of time, we stay on kind of the task here. And you may be asking, well, what is the task? This is a really nice, looking document, but what's the ask here? On page 10, under the financial forecast, I'm going to get to the root of this. So you can see the estimated fund balance as of July 1st, 2018, the estimated revenues, the estimated expenditures in the general fund, and then the estimated fund balance June 30, 2019. So we're talking about the 18-19 fiscal year here. Now this budget deficit projection assumes same enrollment year over year, not adding any students, and then zero budget adjustments for the 18-19 budget, which we know we're going to start looking at both scenarios and options. So does that make sense? This is really the work that we're going to do from here on out, is really looking at that deficit figure. Okay?
I think what that, if I may, what this means is if we do nothing, this is where we are.
Yes.
And so we have to do something, and so that's what these next pages will be about.
Yes. Okay, so what we've done, and I realize this is a change from the past, and so I want to make sure I go through this in great detail and answer any questions that you may have. And by no means is this finished product. This is a starting document intended to guide our conversation. What we've done here under section 4 is put together 3 enrollment scenarios and 3 related budget adjustment options. So enrollment scenarios, budget options. So you can see under scenario 1, we have an action, an outcome, and an anticipated budget reduction. Okay? Scenario 1, the action would be accept the following number of students in the grades listed below under column B. Okay, the anticipated outcome of doing that would be same or similar enrollment next year as this year. This year you can see we have 3,248 students roughly. If we accepted the students in column B, we would be at or about the same enrollment next year. The anticipated budget reduction under scenario 1, you can see the dollar amount there, and I have included the budget details that administration is recommending in the budget analysis section. Before going on to page 12, at the bottom of each enrollment scenario, we have included the building enrollment. This is really what I want to focus on. So you can see the building and our current enrollment, the enrollment for next year, and then really the difference. So you can see that overall, under scenario 1, we're not adding any students from where we're at right now. Okay? Budget options.
The cuts are what get into the sections and all that.
Exactly.
So I mean, so the impact is really educationally the difference between the two boxes, right?
Say again, I want to make sure I'm understanding.
I was just saying, under option number 1, you take the $1.5 million deficit out,
Yeah.
and you take it out of instructors, et cetera, consolidating it, and the impact is, students per section, right?
Exactly.
That's
In other words, you're not adding any revenue, student-generated revenue.
Right, right.
The adjustments that you're making are all on the expenditure side.
Right.
Yep. Budget option 1 at the top of page 12. Again, built on enrollment scenario number 1. Enrollment of 3,248, budget reductions, and additional student revenue increase, of $0. So you can see under the financial projection there, the revenue is the same, to Fred's point. The only difference is on the expenditures. So how did we arrive at that expenditure total? Budget option 1, you can see I've broken out between the 4 buildings. So Wildwood, reduction of 1 section per grade, K through 2, reduction of 1 specialist, and overall change in the specialist model. And I want to point out specifically looking at kindergarten. Let's isolate on kindergarten and really the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2. Okay? So you can see that this year we have 182 kindergarten students, and we have 9 kindergarten sections. I'm not picking on kindergarten, it just happens to be the top line item. 182 students this year divided by 9 sections. On average, we're at 20.2 students per section. Okay, under this option for next year, we stay at 182 because we need the same revenue. However, we have to drop a section because we need those. We need to reduce our expenditures. All of a sudden, you can see that our students per section increases from 20.2 all the way up to 22.8. Okay.
Can we note, though, that that number is against board direction? board direction on kindergarten is 160. And so this has some false assumptions the board has not approved.
The board has desired 160, but there hasn't been that direction given to my knowledge.
I looked at my fellow board members, I thought we were pretty clear at study sessions a couple years ago that 160 was our direction.
The goal is to bring OH Anderson down to 8 sections.
Yeah.
If we take the 20 students out of kindergarten, then we have to add 20 someplace else.
Right, I realize that, but what I'm saying is a decision's been made against a board decision and carried into some information here, and I just want to be clear.
By mistake, because caused by
Right.
the huge summer move-in.
Right.
So if the board wants something different, I think that recommendation should be changed. Because that 160 was the direction that the board has given 2 years ago.
Right. And it was partially about that, but it was partially about the way the model is working with the move-ins across time in order to keep control of the size of both Wildwood and OH and into the middle school. It was getting way too big by accepting that many kindergartners and having move-ins across the years. And so it was a model that was beginning to work, and then we had something that happened the last year. But the board has not changed their direction as far as I know. I've not been a part of the conversation or been in a meeting where the board has changed their direction.
Is there a big number of open enrollment in kindergarten that's getting us up to the 182?
18. We have 164
16
kindergarten.
this year. It's
164
107
kindergarten
It's
residents.
the smallest we've had ever. And the grade 1 open enrollment percentage is 19.6, grade 2 15.8, for a total of Wildwood 14.74. That's the smallest we've
But
had.
how many kindergartners moved in August?
In the summer, it was like 20-something.
So that was what changed this year's number. I think that's what you were asking, what made this big jump? We had set all the open enrollment numbers, everything was done, and then we had, how many, 26?
23 or something.
23 kindergartners move in, so that added a section, because we needed another teacher
I
on
want to
that.
just clarify that some moved in and some had already actually been in the district, but they didn't register.
Oh, okay.
And even they didn't pay attention to the open enrollment or the kindergarten roundup and all those charts.
And looking at that, we have 164 residents, so it's already, you can't not accept the
Right.
residents.
Exactly.
So, so it really,
Right.
so I think they should look at that if that's what they're looking at, because, the board to look at that, because we already have 164 residents.
Right, and that's what he was asking, is where did that
Yeah.
number come from?
And then
Not a section.
just one follow-up, but typically the retention of the open enrollment families or students at that young age, do they tend to stay with you their entire?
Yeah, historically, yes, but there's a couple of complicating factors. One is that we made a change at the board level in policy that if a student moves out of the district that was a resident, they have to reapply for open enrollment.
We didn't make a change, the statute changed.
And
So we're in line with statute.
And so we have 17 students of that are currently residents. They're moving out, and so next year they may not, so our enrollment may drop by another 17. And so the other piece is that last year, we had 378 total applications. That was by August. We did some trickling in the spring and maybe even some in the summer. But this year, January 15th, we had 242, so it's a lot fewer than it's been.
Plus, do you know, Mike, in the survey you were doing, the families that left in the past 2 years for those open enrollment families? So I hear what you're saying, but I don't see data to back it up.
Okay.
I didn't ask if they were previously open enrollment families.
Right.
They were just
So-
families that left our district
Right.
over the last 2 years.
So the ones who are leaving our district, we don't know if they're open enrolled or not. So yes, we hope they stay, but we don't have any data to support the statement, I don't believe. Dr. Larson, do we have data to support the statement?
No.
Oh.
But I'd be surprised if they didn't, because, that just doesn't happen. During the summer move-ins, for example, of the 31 last year, 17 were open enrollment students who moved into the district to become residents. So all that does is move them from the open enrollment
To a resident.
to a resident. It doesn't do anything to change your numbers.
Right.
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 Well then, just Cynthia, if we go down to 160, we need to find another, in option one, we'll need to find another additional $200-some thousand in reductions.
We have 182, just using round figures here, 182 kindergarten students now. If we did drop to 160, that's a decrease of 22 students on average, about $10,000 per student, $220,000. Using on average between $70,000 and $75,000 for teaching staff. If we wanted to make that reduction in kindergarten, which most likely we would spread it more than just in that area, we would need to go from 9 sections then to 6 sections. 160 spread over 6 sections, you're talking about 26 and a half students per section. Now that's making the reduction all in kindergarten, not looking at other options. But certainly the decrease in revenue related to a smaller student count in kindergarten would have to be accounted for on the expenditure side somewhere.
Cynthia, I'm sorry.
Wondering if for either Bill or Mark to speak to third grade, going down to 7 sections. It was, we went down to 8, and it has been the assumption across all of Wage Anderson that then 4th would go down to 8 and 5th would go down to 8. But I don't think anywhere there was the expectation that 3rd would go down again. And so this kind of looks like a double hit for 3rd grade, and I'm wondering if either of you can speak to that.
Yeah, I can, if you don't want to. The charge that was given to all the building principals was to come up with a certain amount of money for reductions.
Okay.
And then, as you can see here, 1 section per grade and reduction of specialist position. So that's basically 4 FTE. That would cover that. And so the class sizes go up from 27.0 to 28.7. So that's pretty high there.
And if you look at the scenario of they reduced even in the kindergarten down to 160, it wasn't spread across. You can see that the class size is already large enough with just one reduction. With a scenario of 180, there's maybe no wiggle room in those classes, so it's already pretty large class size. So we most likely be kindergarten and then maybe another grade level. It could go down to 6. I mean, it's kind of that trickle effect is when you start with a smaller number, you do lose program. You can't sustain it. Where we ended up, luckily, getting the students coming in at the last minute to spread across the kindergarten to 9 sections, and that it is set for 9 sections. So that did help with the kindergarten class size even last year. So it's kind of a hard concept to understand, but sometimes a few more students, when you can spread them across the classrooms of 8 sections, is better than having 7 sections with less students.
I asked a question about, because it was a few years ago when the board said, we've got to get OH down to 8 sections per grade. How we should do that is start with a lower number, starting in kindergarten. But it sounds like, from what I've learned the last couple of sessions, is that there's also this idea that you can have 9 sections in kindergarten, and by the time they go to 8th grade, first grade, there's a few more students in each class.
Mm-hmm.
So if you follow that line of thinking, does that mean then you just take fewer open enrollees as they go up in grade? Is that a scenario? You know what I mean? So you obviously had to think through this. I'd love to know the pros and cons that were probably discussed at that time. Or do you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's just I'm trying
So
to.
what was happening at the time was that we were getting a lot of move-ins. When the housing market turned, a lot of move-ins happened, and they were happening in those older elementary grades. We have homes in the district that are not in the price range of young couples with no kids, and so we find that people tend to move in once they have school-age children or young children. And so we were getting hit so hard at OH with all those move-ins, and we'd already accepted open enrollment students, and they're accepted until they graduate. And so OH grew to be very large, and this was a model we could use to say, if we keep kindergarten small, we've got room for the move-ins over time, and if the move-ins don't happen, you can still add them later. And it was working for 2 years, and then we had a whole bunch, we accepted, you hear us, we accepted, so we thought we were at the number, and then we had a huge influx of students enroll, whether they open enroll or district enroll at that last minute, which pushed us back to that over 180 number.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I'm summarizing, I want to make sure everyone's doing something.
We've created this, just started to create this cohort survivability, as morbid as that sounds, that actually supports your theory here. So we know that based on a 3-year average, looking at 15, 16, 16, 17, and 17, 18, between kindergarten and first grade, on average, we're going to grow by 8.8 residents. 3-year average between first and second grade, and I'll send this out to the group, we're going to grow between by 7.5 residents. However, later on, we have multiple grades where we actually are losing residents, right? Move outs, people are going to private school, whatever the case may be, such that on average, between kindergarten and 12th grade, we're growing on average, based on our 3-year history, by 19.7 students. On average, 1.6 more residents per year. So we have to figure out a way to take this into account with this, knowing that at the early grades, we're growing by more residents than certainly at the secondary level. And we're just kind of getting going on this, so I don't want to pause on it too much. But.
The one thing that, all of the work that you've done has been predicated on the fact that we're going to have the same enrollment
Yes.
in 2018-19 as we had in 2017-18. And our model, as I mentioned before, is unusual in that we're graduating now 282 students and we brought in 182. So it means we need to find 100 students somewhere along the line from grades K-12. And last year with 51 move-ins, some of those already being residents, are already being enrolled. It doesn't get us there. And then now we'll need, if we go down to 160, then we'll need 122 students.
What are the building size for, if you look at your total available space, what's an optimal number of total rooms? I don't care what it is per classroom or per grade, but.
Wildwood was built to have 9 kindergarten sections, 8 first grade sections, and 8 second grade sections. There are space for specialists in Spanish, art, and music. IAD uses the gym space, and then we have reading and math support and ELL, and I think they share, do they share a classroom? Or we put a wall in one, is it too small?
It's a smaller classroom space.
So then so in that school, what percentage of the space are we occupying if you look at it just as on a per student basis?
Teachers have prep hour in their own classroom, so there aren't students in that class at that time.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking at, so you're, for Wildwood, you're projecting a total of 564 students. We have to keep it constant. For the actual space that you have, I don't care how it's being used right now, what is that school designed for? What's the optimal number of students that space can handle?
We did a study like that a few years ago. I can't remember what it was.
Is it more than the 564? I mean,
But the problem is that when you ask a superintendent in a budget crunch that can you get more kids in and get, 10 more students in for $100,000, even if that adds a teacher, you're still making money that you can spend elsewhere or else reduce the deficit. If you'd ask the principal, I've never met a principal who wants a lot more students. Like Newbeck might be the exception. I don't think so.
I'll let you get to 900.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen, but I think it was somewhere, I'm going to say 600 something.
For Wildwood,
I can't remember.
the last.
There was a Johnson control thing.
I don't have the number
Okay.
here, Dr. Larson, off the top of my head. I do know that somebody's asked me what the optimal size, what the right size is per building. I've tried to look at the right size study, and that was more curriculum-based. To me, and again, financial standpoint, separate from curriculum, teaching, learning, that side of things, the optimal size is the last time we balanced the budget, which in our case would be 15, 16. Now, that's the optimal size from a financial standpoint, because that was the last time the budget was balanced.
There's got to be an optimal size from the capital side too, for what we've got invested in our schools. So I'd be very concerned about trying to manage a lower number if you can handle more, because you don't know what next year is going to handle or the year after that. And I mean, you're spending a lot of money on capital structure. You've got to find a way of optimizing that as well with the students. And don't sell you guys short, because dynamite school. And we need to be attracting more people, more families to move in. And I don't see an issue with the housing in this area. I mean, I agree families move in once they have kids, but there's a lot of building going on. There's turnover, and the families will come. So we don't want to cut ourselves short.
So in order to keep the conversation moving forward, I'm on page 12, and what we've done here for both Wildwood and OHA, again, the recommended reduction from administration under scenario 1 is 1 section per grade. And so everybody sees the numbers per section. Flipping to page 13, again, operating under option 1 right now. Middle school, you can see the recommendations there, and looking below the core students per section, dropping from 10 to 9. Matamidi High School, you can see the recommendation there, and then finally district-wide is what you can see the recommendation there. So the goal here, and I realize that there's a lot of moving parts in terms of enrollment numbers, was to come up with scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, look at the dollar amount and how the budget reductions relate to each scenario, and then try to focus in on an enrollment target.
So you're using terms that we don't understand what all of that is. So arts wheel includes what classes? Music, art, what else?
The wheel?
Yeah.
In 6th grade, it's art, health,
Health.
design and make one,
Is it health required though?
yeah, but that's part of the wheel. I mean, that's,
I think what we're trying to get at, when we say reduce allied arts wheel, what would we be able to reduce?
no,
the
what
wheel?
we're doing is going from 9 sections to 8 sections, so
There's no program cut.
there's no program cut.
Oh,
It's just
because
going
that's
from
what it
having
is.
9 classes
Right,
Oh,
down to 8 classes.
okay.
because it sounds like you're reducing something, and so that's what I was like,
All-
what
all we're doing
is
from
coming off
9
the
sections,
wheel?
9
Okay.
sections to 8 sections, so there'll be, instead of 9 classes of art, there'll only be 8 classes of art.
Okay.
You know,
Oh,
and so
okay.
we decrease by that, you know, each area, those 4 areas, arts, health, engineering, and Spanish in 6th grade. So instead of having 9 classes of each, there'll only be 8 classes of each, which increases then class size, because all 6th graders,
Sure.
unless they're in special education, and then take the wheel.
And the 10 to 9 sections means the team teaching approach would disappear.
No, not necessarily. It would be harder. In a perfect world, the team teaching is 10 sections, 5 and 5, so there's, you know, but you can run a team with 5 on one team, 4 on the other. But the problem is that you'll have a teacher teaching 2 sections of social studies, for example, and then another teacher teaching 1 section, another teacher teaching another section. They still have the same core kids. They only have maybe 120 kids to 160 kids on teams. But you can still do it, but it's a lot difficult. You don't have the true team where they're going to, you know, they have 4 core teachers, you know, on one team talking about the same 150 kids like we do now. Instead, you'll have 3 social studies teachers talking about those same 120 kids, you know, trying to get, you know, be a little more, it's harder to do. But if you're on a team if you're on the 4-person team, there'll still be the same 120 kids on that team. You're still going to try to make it that way, but it's very difficult. Optimum is to have 10 sections, you know, in any middle school.
Any other questions on page 13? Scenario number 2, at the top of page 14, again, action, outcome, budget reduction, except the following number of students in the grades listed below under column B. Anticipated outcome, increased enrollment by 40 students in 18-19 compared to 17-18, so increasing from 3,248 up to 3,288. So again, getting back to close to, not quite, levels where the district was in 2015-16 in total.
So Bill, I'm not trying to be a pain here, but when I add up this column, it comes up to 133, and scenario number 1 added up to column number 1 added up to 100, and it says we're increasing by 40. So how does it 33 add?
It has to do with kindergarten. I'm adding 7 from 182 to 189 in kindergarten. And I'm glad you asked it, Julie, it's a good question. Why is there not a number under column B in kindergarten?
But in the resolution, there's 25 kids.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I can't
So-
make it add up
No,
anywhere.
I'm really glad you asked, because it does seem awkward. What I wanted to make sure I included here is absolute fact. So by leaving the kindergarten section of column B open, the reason why I did that is we don't truly know how many non-resident kindergarten students we would need to accept to get to 189 next year, because we haven't had kindergarten round up yet.
And even then, it may not be.
Exactly.
accurate.
Different from kindergarten into first grade, we know that right now we have 182 kindergarten students. If we accepted the 12 in first grade for next year, 182 plus the 12 is the 194. So that's why I didn't include a number in column 2.
Okay, well, I just asked
I
you,
know,
and I'm
it's-
like,
it's-
nothing,
yeah.
I can't.
It doesn't add up.
I can't, it doesn't add
If
up.
I want to make sure it was one thing, is that the numbers add up, that's.
Okay, yeah, I just figured
Yeah,
you
it's
would
a
like.
fair question. In full disclosure, I should have brought that up too. So you can see in column B, adding the 40 students decreases that deficit projection down to the 1.2 from the 1.6. You can see the building enrollment down below and how that's changed from scenario 1. And then flipping the page to page 15. Again, I'll reference budget option 2. Again, what we've done here is just increased the revenue, simple math, increased the revenue by 400,000 related to the student count. And then we factored in some reductions in the original budget reductions under option 1.
So if you bring in 40 additional students, there's no additional increase in cost to that? I mean, I see you're reducing your budget by $10,000 per student there, but there's no offsetting increase?
Yes, so the expenditure total has gone up from option 1. Option 1, the expenditure total is 36.114. Here it's 36.5. Yeah. And so the reason why the expenditures went up is included down below. So for example, at Wildwood, under option 1, we were reducing one section of kindergarten, one section of first grade, one section of second grade. Under option 2, we're reducing, instead of one section each grade, we're reducing one section in total at Wildwood. So Wildwood would go from 25 sections to 24 sections. And again, we've talked quite a bit about kindergarten and really the target enrollment there, and I need to circle back to that, if you will, but I just want to show an illustration, because there's the misconception out there that adding students increases class size. And really, I want to show, just in simple math, under option 2, by adding the 7 students and going from 182 kindergarten students up to 189, we're able to keep that 9th section. Now, whether we want 9 sections or 8 sections or even 6 sections, this is going to hold true, right? It's just a numbers game. This year we have 20.2 kids per section. If we added the 7 students next year in kindergarten, we would increase from the 20.2, but we would increase to 21. As opposed to option 1, where the increase is all the way up to 22.8. So by adding the 7 kids, you're adding the $70,000 in revenue, you're able to keep the 9th section and increase class sizes, but only increase them by 0.8 per.
And can I point out something too on the 3rd and 4th grade part of it? Just put the number in where there would be an increased section and not a reduction there. It doesn't necessarily mean it would be 4th grade. It could be like a combined 3rd, 4th grade class, or it could just be 3rd grade, so.
Where
so-
we're seeing that number.
Yes, exactly.
7 for
Right,
third
but you would
grade.
at least get you wouldn't have to stay 7 seats, but you would have an additional FTE that you could put between 3rd grade or 4th grade.
Instead of
you know.
only introducing 3 sections, they'd be
Exactly.
introducing 2 sections.
So it just is in there for a placeholder that you would know that a staff person would come back. It just depends on, like how many students would actually come into that grade level. So they would have the option though to have that staff person to help reduce some
Sorry, this
classes.
is predicated on accepting 40 additional students.
Right, right.
But philosophically, when I've had conversations with district administration, combination classes were not an option. So now we're saying there's been a shift in philosophical consideration of that.
I mean, we haven't gotten to that point yet to really have the discussion, but those are things that we would have to talk about to see, okay, would that be, are we ending up with X number in third grade and so many in fourth? Does it make sense to do that? But since we don't, this is just all, we'd have to talk about that to see. But what it would be is one more teacher if.
Right. So what you're saying is there'd be 24 teachers in that building, and how they would be allocated could vary.
Yes.
And so there is a potential shift of philosophy around the concept of combination classes.
Yeah, we could look at that too. It just, you never know what the students come, even for you say, you're going to say, take in these open enrollment kids in this grade level, maybe they don't show up there, but at
Right.
least it gives them.
That's great philosophical shift.
And then you can see under the middle school and high school, we've just at this point put down eliminates the need for reductions totaling $80,000 from option one. Essentially, you're adding back $80,000 of what you were reducing in option one. The reason why we didn't include more detail at this point is that it's certainly at the high school largely dependent on registration. Who's registering for what, and that really depends on what they would add back to their budget reductions under option one.
So does then, this really has the appearance of the elementary schools burdening? Carrying the burden.
Yeah. Under this scenario, specifically Wildwood, under scenario one, Wildwood wasn't adding any students. Under scenario two, Wildwood's adding 16 students. So there are more applications at the kindergarten and first grade level, obviously, and so by adding the students, they're able to retain the sections that they would otherwise have to eliminate.
And there isn't enough open enrollment students or other students that have expressed interest in order to help offset. So it offsets Wildwood a little bit more because there's more students that are potential students to bring in.
Well, I think the other thing that's going to bubble to the surface when you're talking about burden is class size is going to become an issue.
It is.
Because when you're talking about 29 students per classroom, that's significant.
Yeah. And that will affect, how many people want to open enrollment.
Well, and so I don't know where we can, if we could all have a fact sheet maybe for the board meeting about the average metro size, I think that's always been a part of
It's
our.
going to be included at your place.
Okay.
The thing is though, is when you get into these enrollment scenarios, you get into, what they call the rubber band theory, because you get your base costs, which are your, building costs and your heating and transportation costs, but then when you start getting into enrollment, where you start giving and taking in your class sizes and things like that, enrollment does funny things, and just putting a few kids here and a few kids there can significantly change things, and just shifting one or two kids may or may not make that much of a difference in the budget. So you really have to look at it, kind of under a microscope and see, do these changes make any difference, or are they negligible?
We have one more option to go, and then I want to wrap this up. Scenario three, accept all open enrollment applications. Okay, so the deadline was a week ago, Monday, the 15th. With the exception of kindergarten and first grade, this scenario would be accepting all open enrollment applications in grades 2 through 12. Increased enrollment, and then anticipated budget reduction. So you can see that the more students we're adding, the budget reduction goes down. And wanted to include this scenario, not necessarily as a recommendation, rather sort of the max available with the exception of kindergarten and first grade. So I won't review because it gets a little bit redundant, the options here, but you can see how that compares. So Again, the purpose here really is not to set our sights too much on the budget reductions, but we do need to set a target, an enrollment target soon.
I'm glad you said it tonight, because that way we'll be able to bring back in February specifics, because these are pretty broad right now.
Exactly, and as I view it, and let's have just a quick conversation on this, I view, for example, if the board approves scenario 1 or scenario 2, by approving open enrollment window 1 scenario, or option 1 or option 2, you're approving the students and the grades listed under a column B. Furthermore, we're essentially, in my mind, setting a target, a building target, as outlined in that scenario. I want to know if that's in line with our members' thinking on that. In other words, if we approve scenario 2, the building target then would be 580 for Wildwood, 669 for OH, 845 for the middle school, 1194 for the high school under scenario 2. Same thing for scenario 1, scenario 3. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Related to
Bill, I'm sorry.
Do you see these targets as targets that are to meet or surpass, or do you see these as targets in terms of limits?
Well, we know that setting an enrollment target and meeting or slightly exceeding that target, to Lucy's point from earlier on, is important to balancing the budget, because we are going to staff at that target. Setting a target and then coming in under the enrollment target is not sustainable.
So you want to meet or slightly exceed.
Now, the difficulty with that is meeting enrollment targets is very difficult. But we need to make sure that we have unanimous understanding that we cannot fall short of our target.
Real quick, I was going to ask a question. So I'm looking at option 3, where you add the extra 15 students over option 2. The Wildwood students per section doesn't change, correct?
Yes, because you'd still be reducing one section.
Yeah, I don't see the per student per section in the other schools, but is the reduction over option 1? So you get rid of the table now. If I look at it, says OH is reduction of one section, grades 3, and one section, grades 4.
So
that's compared to option 1?
Yes, so the reductions at Wildwood and OH in option 3 are the same as option 2.
So, I mean, from an outsider, I guess, just with finance perspective, why not take the most number of students, save the most amount of money? But if you need to claw back some of that to get some extra part-time help to manage the students per section, I mean, from a finance standpoint, that would make a lot of sense. And now you're building your base for future years to manage some of these expenses better. I mean, just because you add increase, 55 students in option 3 doesn't mean you need to save $550,000 extra dollars, right? I mean, you can decide to save, well, we'll save only $400,000, but we'll have more students and we'll lower our number of students per section. I mean, so it's kind of a hybrid there. But I'd, say at this point, you got to go for the students. You got to go for the families, get the students in, and start building that base, and deal with larger student populations a couple years down the road if that happens. We'll have additional tools, hopefully, from the state to deal with that. If you have to put some space buildings outside your schools to deal with that, that's a better option than not using the capital resources that the communities provide. So that's my opinion.
Looking briefly at page 18, just want to always leave with a timeline and some next steps. Obviously, tonight is the 25th. Next meeting, so we've set the table here tonight, and really, February and March, we're going to spend revisiting this information. It's a significant shortfall, and we need to make sure that we set up the time and have the time to really sort through the information. So this is just kind of the start. On the 8th, we're going to look at options and scenarios, both meetings of February, actually, options and scenarios. I'll point your attention to April 12th. and this is not unique to Mtg, a lot of school districts are going through this, unfortunately. That'll be the first time we'll have a proposal on ULAs, which is unrequested leave of absence, and then action on non-renewed contracts for next year, and then fast forward to the regular meeting in May. That's when we would have action on the ULAs for next year. And then finally, on June 14th, formal action on approval of this budget, all funds. So tonight, we're just looking at the general fund. We haven't even started looking at food service, community ed, debt service, OPEB funds. We'll have all that fun stuff coming down the road. Any questions on this?
Just one quick statement is that we get the enrollment target, and to your point, is that depending on what the enrollment target is, that will drive a lot of the budget options. And so the budget options are relatively vague and they're more skeletal, or they're more, you need to flesh them out. And so that would happen in February 8th. The board, I'm assuming, would have some questions or concerns, or have you thought about, we'd come back on the 22nd. I can hear some other thoughts that we have, come back on the 8th. You know, and then so by the time we get to April 12th, as Bill pointed out, we're really pretty well established as to where we are, budget-wise, and it's all dependent on where we are targeting.
Any other questions on agenda item 1 before we move on to agenda item 2?
So the budget target is in these three scenarios. You know, we've talked about the attrition of 1%. 1.5%. So is this something that is the target, the high water mark, and that it would sink down conceivably that 1%?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. So, right, I'll answer your question by giving you the current year. So right now, the current year, 17-18, the school board in December approved a revised budget based on 3,240 students. We're currently at 3,248. That is the type of variance that we want.
So it could go up or it could go down, I mean, we just start back. Okay. But I mean, I think in past meetings, and maybe where we got into some issues with the number target was that, you know, that we were on the assumption that there was no change, but that then we heard that there is this fall off. Now, on what you're saying here, there was not a fall off. So
typically, we don't have a whole lot. So if we have 3,248 now, I've looked based on history from Christmas time to the end of the year, we don't have a ton of attrition in the second semester, a lot like some districts do.
Okay. So we shouldn't even factor that in. We should really look at this as being as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, we know that we need to be at or above that number if we're going to staff to that number.
So we should just look at that as, okay, good.
All right. I hope that I'm answering your question.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, Bill, but I could ask you questions for 2 hours about this because there's so many details that I can't see. So I have no idea how much our contract with the District Management Council is that I see on every single proposal. What is that and how many years are we locked into?
57,000.
A year.
That's what it is.
And how much does, and what?
3 years total.
And what year are we in the contract?
So we'd be breaking the contract?
And then what's the penalty for that?
So we believe, Mark, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. We think we can get out of it, and I don't believe the contract is a penalty for it.
And what does a QCOM coach cost?
The retirement of the QCOM coach is approximately salary, benefits, everything.
Beth might be able to speak to this better. I was at the meeting for an hour and a half, and you were there for the full 2 hours.
It really depends on what level the person is coming into the program, and if they take family or just single insurance, but what we're averaging it out at is 110.
And we have how many of those?
We have 4 coaches currently. Correct, but also keep in mind that QCOM is money that comes in through a levy plus the money that we have from the state. So what we're doing is reconciling that to make sure that the cost, the money that's coming in is paying for what we currently have.
Because the general fund is subsidized this past year.
So equal expenses now. So whatever comes in now through comp money is spent through comp. It's no other.
Anything this year for supplementary?
No.
Okay.
And then, did you have any questions on the specialist piece of it too? Because for the elementary, the reason that we have 5 specialists right now that students go to, and that would change to we only need 4 for both Wellwood and OH because of the number of sections. Because the specialists cover the preps for the teachers in the classroom, and with 4 specialists, then they would be able to cover versus 5. So that would be.
So we would add students at the elementary, so the specialists would again take a huge burden. They would have more students.
No.
Yes, yes, they would have
Yes,
more
in a
than-
sense that
They would have less sections.
Yep, it would be kind of like what the classroom teachers are, across the board.
Except the specialists see all the kids.
Right.
They would see all the kids, but it would be 4 specialists versus 5. There's-
And,
No,
I
no,
mean,
no
so I
positives
feel
about
uncomfortable
cuts.
without asking these questions.
No,
What
please do.
sport at the high school?
Say again?
What sport at the high school do you want to cut?
None.
We don't want to cut
No,
any.
But I mean, you
The
have one
recommendation
listed
for
on
secondary,
here.
I
I'm
believe,
like,
is Alpine skiing.
When you have $1.6 million, it's a lot of cuts. So you look at it, it's a lot of cuts.
I feel uncomfortable saying yes to any of these without knowing what you're thinking
Well,
about.
excuse me,
So
we're not
that's
asking
why.
you to say yes to anything, we're asking you to give us an enrollment target. And depending on the target, then that will influence what we do. So for example, if it's the exact same enrollment that we have this year, if that's the target, then it'll be $1.6 million in reductions. And we'll go back and find out with the specific details as to what we're talking about.
So I'm
If
saying,
it's-
but there's a consequence to every single
Oh,
thing.
heavens, yes,
that
yes.
So that's what I'm curious
Yeah.
what the consequence is, so.
But you're looking for a philosophical piece, and you're giving, these are only potential examples. The board would still have the opportunity to look at a menu or a buffet of cuts and make selections from that. But to get to a number like 1.6, we would have to do things to eliminate teachers just because of the size and scope of that. But where and how would still be a board decision later. Is that, I mean, that's what I'm sort of getting from the conversation, is that we're not philosophically saying, yes, these cuts, but you're giving us an idea of what the cuts would look like for each of these scenarios.
Yeah, we need an enrollment target.
Right, the enrollment target will drive cuts.
Yeah.
And so by picking one of the 3 scenarios, because to me, when I look at it, it's like all the kids, as few kids as possible, something in the middle, right, is kind of what you laid out here. And as you look at those 3 scenarios, if you take all the kids, you have fewer budget cuts.
Yes.
If you take fewer kids, you have bigger budget cuts. And so in order to give context to the scope, you've provided some examples of potential budget cuts, most likely budget cuts, but not decided budget cuts. Is that a
Really
good
good
summary?
summary, really good summary.
But then, my next question along that line is, the resolutions we're looking at tonight couple 2 decisions together into one vote.
Right, because
Picking
you
an
can't
enrollment
get-
target tonight and making a decision open enrollment. I think they're very, very separate decisions. I think we could come up with, well, we'll talk about it at the board meeting. I'll have to go, sorry, you've got another section, another.
No, good summary. I
I have inextricably linked, because you can't have one without the other. If you don't have open enrollment, then you can't hit your targets, and if you don't have the target, you get the open enrollment to do that. You can't bank on kids moving in.
Right.
So, anyway, I'm sorry.
I have 4 minutes to get through the next 2 agenda items, and I think I can do it. I'm going to reference the large, page 2 of the large dollar, or the large sheet of paper, page 2. Looking, so this is the quarter 2 budget update, okay? So we're just looking at expenditures, and we're scaling back to 2017-18. So it's important at the end of each fiscal quarter that we look at where we're at budget actual. So this is information as of December 31st, 2017, compared to December 31st, 16, December 31st, 15, okay? We've spent a large portion of this meeting looking at difficult scenarios, so I'm going to give you a good news item. Overall, as of December 31st, 2017, we have spent 40.1% of our general fund budget. Everybody sees that number on the bottom? Yep.
Are you halfway, you're done with this, or you're not quite halfway through the school year?
Yes, but We should not and are not and will never be at 50% because we have some end of the fiscal year payments. Things like the Q-Comp stipend, they go out at the end of the year. Things like payoffs for July and August, so to speak. So we'll never be exactly at 50%. Compared to last year, we're at 41.9%. Compared to 2 years ago, we're at 40.8%. So the good news scenario there is based on the revised budget approved by the school board in December, which as you remember had a deficit position. The good news is at this point, I cannot see a scenario where we would be above that expenditure budget in the current year, okay? So that budget had us in a deficit position, at least on the expenditure side, we are tracking to be slightly under that expenditure budget. Good news item. We don't have time to go through the variances by program. If you go through and you have questions, please email them to me and we can work on that side. Turning to the third page, food service and community education. Slightly less year-to-date in food service, 25.9 compared to 29 and 17. That's going to be all over the board based on timing of payments. So we contract out our food service with the Stillwater District for management. That's going to depend on the timing of the payments.
Also, there's less September, October, November, December, and then January. So.
I should point out participation is up for this year, which is a good thing. Sales and participation, which you can't see here, but we just know is up in food service this year. And then any differences really in community services at this point are going to be related to just timing on contracted service payments. So that's your summary there. In the final 2 minutes, I'd like to talk about this memo that was passed around at your place. The third agenda item that I have is just the potential levy for November 2018 update. So I wanted to include some key dates and then what I view to be a large hurdle that we're going to need to communicate out as we go. And we touched on it a little bit already. So key dates related to a potential referendum in November 2018. And again, nothing's been decided at this point. Key dates would be February 22nd, which is the school board study session in February. We have on the agenda that the school board to begin discussions on dollar amounts and tax impact scenarios related to the November levy and really start to look at that information. May 24th, which is the school board meeting right before Memorial Weekend. And again, this is a tentative draft. Certainly these can be moved up or back depending on how things go during the end of February. Administration recommends formal approval on ballot language for the November referendum. We'd have that done before Memorial Day so we could really spend the 12 weeks in June, July, and August working on the details related to that. An important date here, August 24th, 2018, that's the last possible day for approval of a resolution calling for an election. And then finally, election day will be on November 6th of 2018. So there's a couple of key dates to keep in your back pocket as we go forward here. And then finally, I know we've looked at this quite a bit, but we have also the district levy per student. You can see where our district falls, and then the school portion of property taxes payable in 2017 on a $250,000 homestead residential property. The median homestead, residential homestead price in our taxing district for proposed 2018 is $340,000 in the $340,000 range, so this is slightly less than that. But you can see, as mentioned earlier, that although the dollar amount in the voter-approved levy per student is fairly low compared to our contiguous boundaries in Mahtomedi, the tax impact is relatively high compared to our two contiguous boundaries, and that just has to do with the makeup of our taxing district. Okay, so that'll be something that when the Finance Committee and the school board talks about dollar amounts that are needed to maintain our operations, and then tax impact scenarios, those have to definitely be both part of the conversation. Okay? Questions?
Quick question, probably a quick answer. So if you go the route of additional levy, would that be a bolt-on to what we currently have, or would it be a brand new type?
We call it revoke and replace. You revoke the existing one, replace it with another one.
Okay.
Certainly more information to come on that.
I'm just thinking your interest rates would be higher, I would think, so just if there's a way of keeping keeping the one in place with an additional one to end at the same date might make more sense.
You can explore that. You can talk about it. So we're out there.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna rearrange the tables.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, that's it, yeah,
Great time.
6:45. Thank you, everyone, I appreciate it.